Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Alicia Walsh of Recollection Heritage and my colleague Gabriel Bodard of the University of London. Um, he's going to talk to you today about approaches and methods in 3D modeling and publishing.
Cool, thank you, Alicia. So this presentation is really a sort of lightning overview of the main approaches and methods related to 3D technologies that we'll be introducing in more detail over the course of the other tutorials in this series. So this is the overview of what I'm going to talk about. Here, I'm going to talk about imaging, modeling, virtual reality, augmented reality, and then a few different approaches to distribution of 3D models. So for the first item on this, we could talk about 3D imaging or 3D scanning. This is the process of taking a physical object, that is to say, an object in the real world, which may be an ancient object or a contemporary object, it may be fragmentary, and creating a 3D model directly of that object by means of scanning it. And that can be various scanning methods, laser scanning, photogrammetry, or various other methods that we'll talk about later. This is as opposed to the second method we're talking about, which is 3D modeling, sometimes called 3D reconstruction or 3D visualization. All slightly different approaches to the same basic principle, which is that you're using 3D tools of one kind or another to create a model of an object that may not exist anymore, may not exist completely, may not exist at all, or may not exist yet. This is exactly the same technology that is used, for example, by architects using computer-aided design to design a building that does not yet exist and may never exist, for that matter. But it can also be used in archaeological and heritage settings to, for example, try to reconstruct a building such as the Temple of Isis in Pompeii, as shown here, from the archaeological remains, which may be just the foundations, or maybe a little more than that. There may be drawings of it when it was in a more complete state. There may be some parts of it have had to be extrapolated from other sources. But you're basically recreating a model of something that doesn't exist. So you can't use scanning for this. You have to use design tools to create this model. So that's the main difference between imaging and modeling as the two ways of creating your 3D object. The third approach that I want to talk about briefly here is virtual reality, and this in a sense, this is one of the ways of using a 3D object that you've created, or a series of 3D objects, or a 3D environment. Virtual reality is the process of creating a 3D environment inside which the user or the viewer can travel and can maneuver themselves to see the object from various different positions. The most immersive form of virtual reality is where it takes any particular view of the object and projects it as two images onto a screen or onto two separate screens in a headset, such as the one you see the user here wearing. Such that you really get the illusion, fooling your eyes, that you're inside the environment. And many of these headsets will have gyroscopes and so forth built in, so that when you turn your head, the view turns exactly the same way as your head would. So you can basically act as if you were inside the 3D object. It's in some ways the most immersive way of viewing a 3D object. The other approach, which is similar in some ways, is something that's called augmented reality, or AR. It's not quite as immersive in the sense that you don't wear a set of goggles and you don't feel like you're actually inside the object, but what it does is it allows you to project 3D imagery overlying what you actually have in front of you. By means of a tablet or mobile device of some kind. So this can be used to, for example, you point your phone with the camera turned on at a museum object, and it will reconstruct that fragmentary object into the complete object, or it will animate that object, or it will, in some other way, it will create a non-existent 3D model of what you're seeing on the screen. You know, in the case behind it. This can be used also to create things that are not there at all. One of the fun things augmented reality is used for is in gaming, where you can be wandering around an environment, a ruined building or a landscape, and at certain points in that landscape or in the digital version of that landscape, creatures or objects or monsters or ghosts have been put into the 3D model, so that if you're viewing the landscape just with your eyes, you see nothing but the landscape. But if you're viewing the landscape through the intermediary of your screen, something appears there that is not really there. And when that happens, because you're seeing the environment that's actually before you on your camera, as well as the part that's not actually there, whether that's a monster jumping out at you, or whether that's a ruined castle being rebuilt in front of your eyes, that in some ways is even more immersive than virtual reality, because you know it's there and you are right there where it is meant to be. So it can be a very, very effective way of interfacing with 3D objects. And for the final thing I want to comment on here is really is ways of distributing 3D models. So we've seen that two of the ways of using 3D models in immersive environments are VR and AR, but there's other ways of distributing 3D models, of publishing those models, and of doing things with those models after you have created them, whether by scanning or by visualization. And the one way of doing this is simply the 3D model is a digital file on a computer. It's usually a very large file, but nevertheless it's a file that, like other files, can be put onto a flash drive, or it can be emailed to somebody, or it can be made downloadable from the web, or it can be published in the cloud, or it can be uploaded to a site like Sketchfab, which distributes models, including models of heritage objects and locations, such that other people can find your object, can interact with it through a site, or in some cases, if you choose to make it possible, they can download the object and do other things with it, reuse it, put it into other environments, and so forth. And there's a few of the approaches to that we'll talk about in more detail. The other way in which you can distribute 3D models, or you can make your 3D models available to other people, is by printing that model. So taking what had been a purely virtual object and making it physical again. Either physical again if it was a scanned object, or physical for the first time if it was a design model or a visualization. And in this case, we have an image here of an object being 3D printed using an additive 3D printing method. And as you can see, if I tell you that this was originally a model of a Kylex, and that those vertical columns beneath the handles were not part of the original object, they're part of the printing object, because it's impossible to print additively an object, a part of an object that has nothing beneath it. So those supports are simply there beneath it to make it possible to print that. And it's expected that you would cut those supports off or snap those supports off after it's printed, before using the object. And this is being printed in a plastic. But 3D printed objects can then be used for various purposes. They can be handled. They can be sold. They can be used. You can drink out of a Kylix if you make it out of a waterproof material, and so forth, and get a sense of what this object was like, what this object was used for, and so forth. And so that's in some ways the most tangible way of distributing a 3D object and making it available to other people, is to print it, so then they've got it again as a physical object, and they can access. So those are the major approaches to 3D, some of which we'll be talking about in more detail later.
Great, thank you for that introduction to 3D applications, guys.